Friends, if you're a fan of movies that keep you guessing, send chills down your spine, and leave you thinking long after the credits roll, then today's video is tailor-made for you. Because today, we're going to talk about one of the most thrilling, suspense-filled, and mind-bending horror movies of all time. Final Destination, which hit the big screen back in the year 2000. Yes, the same film that started a franchise and made us all look at everyday objects a little differently. From airplane windows to shower cords. Before we dive into the world of fate, premonitions, and unexpected deaths, let me remind you, if this is your first time visiting our channel, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on all things movies, entertainment, and behind-the-scenes facts. And if you're already part of our growing movie-loving family, welcome back and thank you for your continued support. In today's video, we're not just going to tell you about Final Destination. We're going to take a deep dive into everything that makes this film so unforgettable. We'll talk about what the movie is all about, where you can watch it today, whether on an OTT platform, cable, or satellite channel, and what language and subtitle options are available. Whether you want to watch it in English or with dubbed audio, we've got you covered. But hold on, that's just the beginning. We're going to take you behind the scenes and give you the full story of how Final Destination was made. From the early days of writing and pre-production, all the way to post-production and final release. We'll explore how the filmmakers took a simple concept. A teen has a vision of a plane crash, and turned it into one of the most original horror concepts of its time. We'll talk about how the creative team came up with the idea, how the suspense was built, and how they made sure the tension never dropped, even for a second. And of course, we'll dive into the music and sound design. The creepy background score that made the scenes even more intense, the sound effects that added realism to every shocking moment, and the overall tone that kept the audience glued to their seats. We'll also discuss the cinematography and visual effects that helped make the death scenes so memorable, each one planned down to the last detail to shock, surprise, and entertain. We'll take a close look at the budget and how much it cost to bring this terrifying story to life. And yes, we'll talk about the box office numbers too. How this small-budget thriller turned into a massive global success and kickstarted a film series that is still going strong with fans even today. We'll also talk about how Final Destination influenced many other films that came after it. Now don't worry, we won't spoil everything. But we will break down the core storyline for those of you who are curious. What happens when someone sees a deadly event before it happens, and manages to escape? Can you really cheat death? And if you do, will it come back for you anyway? These are the chilling questions the film explores, and we'll give you a sneak peek into how the plot unfolds, just enough to spark your curiosity without ruining the fun. We'll also review the characters, the performances of the lead actors, and what made their roles so impactful. From Devon Sawa's unforgettable performance as Alex Browning, to Ollie Larter's powerful portrayal of Clear Rivers, to the rest of the supporting cast who brought emotion, fear, and tension to every scene, we'll discuss how each actor contributed to the film's success. On top of that, we'll share some truly amazing trivia and facts about the movie that even die-hard fans may not know. Like, did you know the film was inspired by an unused script for an episode of The X-Files? Or that the creators intentionally avoided using a traditional villain, choosing instead to make death itself the unseen force that haunts the characters? We'll uncover all these little details and more that helped shape the identity of Final Destination as a genre-defining classic. So my dear friends, make sure you stay with us till the very end of this video, because we've got a lot of exciting stuff to cover. Whether you're someone who loves horror movies, someone curious about how films are made, or just someone looking for something gripping to watch this weekend, this video has something for everyone. Alright then, without wasting any more time, let's dive into the chilling, thrilling, and unforgettable world of Final Destination. Let's start the video. Alright friends, get ready, because the plot of Final Destination isn't just a simple story. It's an intricate, domino-falling, nerve-twisting experience that keeps you on edge from the very first minute. This isn't just another teen horror flick where a masked villain jumps out with a knife. No. This time, the villain is invisible. It's everywhere. It's unstoppable. And worst of all, it's death itself. Sounds intense already, doesn't it? The story kicks off like a regular high school movie. Our lead character, Alex Browning, is all packed and ready for an exciting class trip to Paris. He's got the nervous energy of a teenager flying for the first time, and everything around him starts to feel just a little off. But then, out of nowhere, boom, he has this vivid, terrifying vision. The plane explodes mid-air. We're not talking about a few flashes. He lives through it in his mind. Screaming, fire, chaos. Everything. And just like that, he snaps out of it. Now, you know that feeling when your gut is screaming something's wrong. Alex doesn't ignore it. He freaks out, makes a huge scene on the plane, and gets himself kicked off, along with a handful of classmates and one very confused teacher. Everyone thinks he's lost his mind. But then, the unthinkable happens. As they sit back at the gate, watching the plane taxi down the runway, it actually explodes. Right there. In the sky. Just like in his vision. Shocking. It's intense. And it's only the beginning. At first, it seems like they've just had a close brush with death. An eerie miracle. The kind of thing you'd tell your grandkids about. But no. Death doesn't like to be cheated. That's where the movie flips the script. You think it's a survival story. It's not. It's a countdown. Because one by one, the survivors of that doomed flight start dying. Not randomly. Not suddenly. But in the exact order they would have died on the plane. Death, it turns out, has a plan. And now it's catching up. This is where the storytelling gets brilliant. The movie doesn't rely on cliches or typical horror setups. It plays with cause and effect, tiny details, and a terrifying sense of inevitability. Cup of water spills. Door creaks open. A piece of cloth drifts toward a flame. And you, as the audience, are sitting there holding your breath because you know what's coming, but you don't know how. The suspense builds slowly, then hits hard. Every death is designed like a puzzle, and you can't help but watch every scene like you're trying to crack the code before it's too late. The narrative doesn't jump around in time, but it plays with tension in clever ways. It shifts focus between characters, allowing us to see how each of them deals with the fear of being hunted by something they can't see, touch, or fight. Alex becomes obsessed with figuring out the pattern. He believes there's a logic to the madness, and that if he can decode it, maybe he can save the others, and himself. That's when things really heat up. Suddenly, it's not just about survival. It's about outsmarting death. A huge turning point comes when Alex realizes that death is following a specific sequence. He literally creates a map of the seating chart from the flight and uses it to predict who's next. That part of the movie is genius. It takes the horror genre and turns it into a suspense thriller, almost like a supernatural detective story. Every moment from then on feels like a race against time. Can he stop what's coming? Can he intervene? Can he break the chain? Meanwhile, the emotional tension is rising too. The characters start to crack. Some go into denial. Some lash out. Some turn on each other. Others are paralyzed by fear. There's guilt, grief, desperation. It's not just about dying, it's about how these kids cope with knowing they were supposed to be dead. It adds a psychological layer to the horror. You're not just watching people run from danger. You're watching people fall apart under the weight of fate. And what's so fascinating about this narrative is that the killer never shows up. There's no monster hiding in the closet. No masked villain in the woods. The villain is fate itself. Subtle, silent, and cold. The movie turns everyday life into a minefield. Shower. Power outlet. Cracked mug. Suddenly everything is a threat. It makes the ordinary feel deadly. And that's what keeps the tension so high. And the deaths, oh the deaths. Each one is like a mini short film of suspense. The camera lingers. The music builds. You see a fan spinning too fast, a knife edge glinting in the background, a liquid trailing toward an outlet, and you know something's coming. But the movie is smart. Doesn't always take the obvious route. Sometimes it builds all the suspense around one object, and then delivers the fatal blow from somewhere totally unexpected. That unpredictability. That's the magic. Thematically, Final Destination is a bold movie. It asks big questions in the middle of all the chaos. Can you change your destiny? Is everything predetermined? Are we just pieces on a cosmic chessboard, or do we have free will? The characters wrestle with these ideas as they try to change their fate, and the movie lets the audience ponder them too, right up until the last scene. And the ending. Let's just say it doesn't let you breathe easy. Just when you think the nightmare's over, just when it feels like maybe, just maybe, they've escaped the pattern, boom. The cycle restarts. Death doesn't sleep. It only waits. So, from beginning to end, Final Destination takes a simple idea, cheating death, and turns it into a relentless, chilling, and wickedly creative story that pulls you in and never lets go. It doesn't follow a typical horror movie structure, and that's what makes it so memorable. It plays with logic, fate, suspense, and fear in a way that keeps you thinking long after it's over. It's a masterclass in making the unseen scarier than any monster. And as the deaths unfold, one twist at a time, you can't help but keep watching. You're not just witnessing a story, you're trapped in it, right alongside the characters. Now let's really dig into the beating heart of Final Destination. Its characters. Because as much as the film is about unpredictable death traps and eerie premonitions, it's also a deep dive into human behavior when the walls start closing in. These characters don't just react. They unravel, they evolve, they reveal layers you never saw coming. And in a film where the villain is literally the concept of fate, watching these people try to claw their way out of destiny's grip is what makes the whole ride so gripping. Let's begin with Alex Browning, our everyman-turned-death-dodging detective. He starts off as a nervous, ordinary teenager. He's a little awkward, he fumbles through his words, and you get the sense he's not exactly the popular kid. He's just trying to get on a plane and not mess up a trip to Paris. But then boom, he sees the whole plane explode in a vision so vivid it feels real. And from that moment on, Alex is changed forever. What's fascinating is how quickly he transforms, not just into a survivor, but into a man on a mission. He goes from being scared and confused to becoming the self-appointed architect of everyone's survival. He studies patterns, follows clues, tries to decode the logic behind death's plan. He becomes obsessed with the design, and it's not just about saving his own skin, it's about taking responsibility for everyone. There's something both heroic and tragic in the way he throws himself into solving the mystery. He's not always right, and he definitely doesn't have it all figured out, but he refuses to give up. He becomes a kind of reluctant leader, holding everything together while the rest of the group starts to fracture. Then we have Clear Rivers. Quiet, artistic, and emotionally guarded. She's definitely not the cheerleader or the comic relief. She's the observer. Clear isn't the kind of character who talks a lot, but when she does, it matters. You can tell from the beginning that she's used to keeping her distance, probably because of whatever mess her past holds. She's the kind of person who builds walls to protect herself, but Alex's vision and the chaos that follows crash right through those walls. What's beautiful about Clear's arc is how she slowly lets someone in. At first she's cautious. She keeps to herself. But as the deaths start happening and the tension builds, she steps up. She becomes Alex's closest ally. Not just because she believes him, but because she starts to believe in them. By the end, Clear is no longer hiding in the shadows. She's risking her life, standing up to fate, and fighting with everything she's got. She starts out as a loner and ends up as a protector. Her growth isn't loud, it's strong, quiet, and powerful. Carter Horton. Oh boy, this guy. The ultimate alpha male with a side of serious rage issues. Carter is that dude who punches lockers for no reason, gets in everyone's face, and thinks he's invincible. But underneath all that macho nonsense is someone who's terrified. He just doesn't know how to show it. First, Carter is all about control. He refuses to believe that death is hunting them. He laughs it off, mocks Alex, and tries to act like nothing scares him. But as people start dying, the cracks begin to show. He lashes out not because he's brave, but because he's panicking. One of his most revealing moments is when he challenges death, literally tries to stand in front of a train and see if it'll hit him. That's not confidence. That's a desperate man trying to prove to himself that he still has some power in a world that suddenly makes no sense. Carter isn't likable all the time, but he's real. He's messy. And when he finally decides to help instead of fight, it's a major turning point. That shift from defiance to reluctant teamwork is what gives his character depth. Then there's Billy Hitchcock, played by the always hilarious Sean William Scott. Billy is the comic relief, but he's also the heart. He's awkward, he's excitable, and he's just happy to be included. He wasn't supposed to get off the plane. He just got caught in the crossfire of Alex's freakout. So when people start dying, Billy is the one character who's completely unprepared. He doesn't try to solve anything. He doesn't try to be the hero. He's just scared. And that's what makes him relatable. In a movie filled with people trying to act brave or figure things out, Billy's fear feels raw and genuine. He looks to Alex for answers because he doesn't have any of his own. And when things go south, he feels it the most. His breakdowns are heartbreaking because you know he's just an innocent guy caught in something way bigger than himself. His death, when it comes, hits hard. Not because he was a major player but because he never deserved any of it. Let's not forget Ms. Valerie Luton, the teacher. Her arc is a quick but haunting one. She survives the crash, but you can tell she's deeply shaken. She tries to move on, even plans to leave town and start fresh, but you see the paranoia bubbling under the surface. She's the adult, the one who's supposed to have it all together, but she's unraveling faster than any of the kids. What's fascinating is how her fear turns into suspicion. She starts looking at Alex like he might be the problem. Her mind twists itself into knots trying to find logic in the chaos. And her death. It's like watching a slow-motion breakdown turned into a horror scene. The way it's staged, the panic, the overreaction, the desperate need for control, reflects everything she's been bottling up. She's a walking anxiety attack, and in the end, it consumes her. Then there's Todd Wagner, Alex's best friend. Todd isn't in the spotlight for long, but his role is crucial. He's the first one to go, and his death sets the tone for everything that follows. What's tragic about Todd is that he tries so hard to hold it together. He supports Alex after the crash, he tries to be strong for his family, and he genuinely believes they might be okay. His death feels unfair, because he's not reckless, not foolish, just unlucky. And that's the horror of this film. It's not about who deserves to die. It's about the randomness of it all. Todd reminds us of the real stakes. Not just death, but the emotional wreckage it leaves behind. All of these characters, with their different fears, reactions, and coping mechanisms, make Final Destination more than just a death-by-numbers horror movie. This is a story about people losing their grip on reality, trying to survive something they can't see or understand. Some of them try to run, some fight back, some break down. And the way they change in the face of that invisible force, that's where the true tension lies. They argue, they panic, they cry, they grow, they fall apart. And through it all, you see real personalities, not just horror movie archetypes. You might not love them all, but you believe in them. You feel for them. And when death finally catches up to each of them, it doesn't feel like just another plot twist. It feels like a loss. That's the magic of the character development in Final Destination. It pulls you in, makes you care, and reminds you that in this story, it's not about whether they'll die, but how deeply you'll feel it when they do. Absolutely. Here is a fully expanded, entertaining, and detailed version of the performances section for Final Destination 2000, written to be immersive, fun, and deeply engaging, without using a formal review structure. Let's dive into the wild world of Final Destination where nobody knows who's next, and everyone is running from a villain that can't be seen, heard, or punched in the face. In a setup like that, you can't rely on creepy masks or snarling monsters to bring the fear. You've got to let the actors do the heavy lifting. And boy, do they bring it. The performances in this movie are what make it feel alive, even as characters drop like flies. Every actor walks a tightrope between believable teenage angst and full-blown existential terror. And it's that emotional juggling act that makes Final Destination stand out in the crowded graveyard of horror films. Let's start with Devon Sawa, the reluctant psychic in training, Alex Browning. Devon doesn't just act panicked. He embodies the panic. He twitches. He trembles. He stares off into space like he's just been told he's cursed by the universe, which, to be fair, he kinda has. You can see the wheels spinning in his head every time he's on screen. His eyes darting. his mouth opening to say something but then closing because he's already calculating whether a power line or a freak gust of wind might take someone out next. There's this frantic energy Devon gives to Alex that feels so real, like he's trying to hold on to logic while the world turns into a death trap. He has the sweaty determination of a guy who's seen too much and now has to carry the burden of warning others, even if they think he's completely lost it. Watching Devon work through that paranoia and guilt is like watching someone build a conspiracy board in real time, with string, pushpins, and pure desperation. And then there's Larter as Clear Rivers. Cool name, even cooler performance. Ollie doesn't play Clear like your typical horror movie heroine. She's not the screamer. She's the quiet, observant one. The one who's already carrying emotional scars before the plane explosion even happens. You get the sense she's seen darkness before. And maybe that's why she doesn't run from Alex when he starts sounding like a doomsday prophet. Ollie plays her with this understated intensity. She doesn't need dramatic monologues to make an impact. It's all in her stillness, her watchful eyes, her way of speaking softly while everyone else is yelling. And when she does spring into action, especially in the third act, you realize she's not just tagging along. She's fighting just as hard as Alex, and maybe even with more heart. There's something deeply grounded about her, like she's accepted that the world doesn't make sense but still chooses to survive anyway. Kerr Smith as Carter Horton brings that classic too cool for everything energy, but he does it with depth. Carter is angry. Always. He's got the jaw clenched, the eyes narrowed, the car revving. But Kerr plays him in such a way that his rage doesn't feel like empty bravado. It feels like fear wearing a leather jacket. There are moments when Carter's about to lose it and you can see the fear bleeding through. He tries so hard to stay in control, to act like fate has nothing on him. But Kerr knows exactly when to let those walls crack. You don't like Carter all the time. He's pushy, arrogant, and constantly about 3 seconds from throwing someone. But when he finally starts to believe in Alex's theory, his shift into reluctant team player is actually satisfying to watch. Kerr gives us a guy who's used to punching his way through life and now has to figure out how to outwit death itself, which is slightly harder than winning a schoolyard fight. And then there's Sean William Scott as Billy Hitchcock, who walks into the movie like a lost puppy and quickly becomes the most lovable guy in the cast. This is probably one of his most restrained performances compared to his more famous outrageous roles, but that's what makes it work. Billy is goofy, awkward, and constantly hovering at the edge of the group like he's just happy to be included. Sean brings a kind of wide-eyed innocence to Billy. He doesn't try to be the hero. He doesn't pretend to understand what's going on. He just reacts honestly, whether that's screaming, crying, or begging not to be next. There's a scene where he basically pleads with Alex, saying, "I don't want to die." And Sean delivers it with such raw emotion, it lands like a gut punch. It's heartbreaking because it feels so real. Billy's not trying to decode fate. He just wants to live. And when his time comes, in one of the movie's most shocking death scenes, you feel like you've just lost the one person who brought a little light into all that darkness. Kristen Cloak, who plays Ms. Luton, deserves major applause for the way she descends into chaos. She starts off composed, the kind of teacher who's trying to hold it together for the kids while clearly unraveling inside. Kristen plays her like someone who's trying to be okay but failing miserably. Her voice gets tighter, her movements more jittery, and her paranoia just spills out. One minute she's calmly packing her things, the next she's jumping at shadows and accusing students of being cursed. It's fascinating to watch because Kristen doesn't make her a caricature. She makes her a human being under unbearable pressure. And when her death scene kicks in, let's just say it's a symphony of terror. She runs, slips, bleeds, screams. Everything is dialed up to 11. Kristen turns that entire sequence into an opera of panic, and it's unforgettable. Even the supporting cast like Chad Donella as Todd makes an impact. Todd is sweet, supportive, and completely unprepared for the horror that's about to unfold. Chad plays him with this earnest vulnerability. You just know he's not going to make it, but you root for him anyway. His scenes with Devon Sawa early on give us that needed emotional foundation. They feel like real friends, bickering, joking, worrying about girls. And that makes Todd's death all the more painful. Chad makes Todd feel like the guy next door, the kind who helps you fix your bike or gives you advice you didn't ask for. He's not flashy, but that's exactly why he matters. What's really special is how all these performances click together. You believe that this group of people is being stalked by a force they can't see. You believe in their fear, their frustration, their attempts to take back control. And none of it would work if the cast wasn't giving 100%. There are no lazy deliveries here. No winks at the camera. No phoned-in screams. Everyone acts like they're really in the middle of this bizarre cosmic horror. And because they do, you believe it too. The magic of Final Destination isn't just in its concept. It's in how the actors anchor that concept in human emotion. Whether they're running from invisible danger or screaming about premonitions and fate, every single one of them makes you feel the stakes. They aren't just characters on a kill list. They're people fighting tooth and nail against something they don't understand. And in a genre that often forgets to care about its cast, Final Destination reminds us that great performances can be the difference between a horror movie that fades and one that sticks with you forever. Alright, let's really sink our teeth into the direction of Final Destination. Because James Wong's work here is like a carefully choreographed dance with death, and every step he takes pulls you deeper into this tense, nerve-wracking experience. It's not just about getting actors to scream or throwing jump scares at you like confetti. Wong crafts a mood so thick with dread you can practically feel it pressing in on you from all sides. What makes his direction stand out isn't just the scary moments. It's how he builds an entire world where even the most ordinary things feel suspicious, like they're quietly plotting your doom. From the very first moments, Wong sets a tone that feels both grounded and otherworldly. He starts with Alex's premonition on the plane, but instead of making it a flashy disaster sequence, he dials it back, using subtle camera moves, tight framing, and carefully controlled pacing to make you experience the panic rather than just watch it. The way he uses silence and sound is masterful. 1 second there's calm, maybe the hum of an engine, the murmur of passengers chatting, and the next, everything shatters. It's not just the explosion itself that hits you, but the way Wong lingers on the moments before and after, letting you absorb the shock slowly. That sense of tension stretching out before snapping is a recurring theme in his direction. And speaking of camera work, Wong loves to use perspective to mess with you. He often frames scenes so that your eyes catch something in the background just a second before the characters do, like a precariously balanced ladder or a frayed electrical wire. Those shots make you feel like a voyeur who's in on a terrible secret, which ratchets up the suspense. You're constantly scanning the edges of the frame for the next threat, and that's exactly the feeling Wong wants you to have. Hyper-alert, anxious, and unable to relax even for a second. Wong's control over pacing is like a roller coaster operator who doesn't just send you flying over drops and loops randomly. He builds the tension methodically. There are moments of quiet where the characters argue or plan or just breathe, and you think, okay, maybe the worst is over. But then he throws in a slow burn, like a water leak that keeps dripping and dripping until the ceiling finally caves in. The way he balances those quieter scenes with bursts of chaos keeps the audience off kilter. You never quite know when the next disaster will strike, which keeps your heart rate elevated for the entire runtime. Another standout aspect is how Wong uses lighting and color to paint the film's mood. The palette is often cold and washed out, casting the world in blues and grays that drain the warmth right out of the scenes. It's as if the vibrancy of life is slowly being sucked away by the ever-present shadow of death. Even in daylight scenes, there's this sterile, almost clinical feel. And when things do get darker, like Todd's bathroom sequence or the late-night confrontations, the shadows become characters themselves, lurking and shifting just outside your comfort zone. Wong uses light not just to reveal but to conceal, letting the darkness hide threats that could spring out at any moment. Wong also smartly avoids over-explaining the rules of the story, trusting the audience to piece things together alongside the characters. This creates a mysterious vibe where fate feels like a puzzle you're all trying to solve. The camera work reflects this, often lingering on objects or moments that might seem insignificant but are actually crucial clues. There's a wonderful subtlety in how Wong ties the visual storytelling to the narrative. Nothing is wasted, every shot, every angle, every pause is purposeful. When it comes to the death scenes, Wong treats them like intricate set pieces. Instead of relying on cheap gore or shock value, he builds them like elaborate Rube Goldberg machines. There's a mesmerizing complexity to the way these sequences unfold, each fatal event triggered by a chain reaction of small, seemingly harmless actions. Wong directs these with patience and precision, letting the tension climb as you watch the dominoes fall one by one. The deaths feel inevitable, almost poetic in their execution, which makes them simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. You're horrified, but you can't look away. The director also has a keen sense of character moments amid the horror. He gives his actors room to breathe and express real emotions, grief, fear, anger, and hope, so that the movie never feels like a parade of victims. Instead, these are people fighting an invisible enemy, struggling to make sense of a nightmare. Wong's direction brings out the human element beneath the supernatural premise, which is why the audience connects with the story on more than just a surface level. We're invested not just because we want to see who survives, but because we care about who they are. Sound design is another subtle weapon in Wong's arsenal. From the faint buzz of electricity to the creak of a loose floorboard, every auditory detail is amplified to keep you on edge. He uses silence just as effectively, making the absence of sound feel like a warning in itself. It's a layered approach that envelopes you in the film's world, making the suspense almost tactile. And let's not forget the way Wong shapes the narrative flow. The story moves forward with a sense of inevitability, but it's never boring or predictable. He peppers the film with twists and turns that keep you guessing. The camera angles and editing choices often emphasize the uncertainty of what's about to happen, like the way a shot might focus on a character's face, then snap to a wide shot of the environment, making you realize just how vulnerable they are. The direction makes every scene feel charged with possibility, the possibility that death could be lurking anywhere, ready to strike. In the end, James Wong's direction is what turns Final Destination from a simple horror idea into an immersive, almost living nightmare. He creates a film where the tension is always simmering, where the mundane becomes menacing, and where every frame is carefully designed to keep you looking over your shoulder. It's this meticulous control over tone, mood, and storytelling that keeps the movie from ever feeling like just another slasher flick. Instead, it's a masterclass in suspense that creeps up on you quietly, and then hits you like a lightning bolt when you least expect it. Watching it, you realize you're not just a passive viewer. You're caught in the grip of a director who knows exactly how to pull your fear strings, one subtle move at a time. Alright, let's really unpack the cinematography of Final Destination, because it's one of those rare cases where the camera itself feels like a silent character, watching, waiting, and sometimes even teasing you as disaster creeps closer. Robert McLaughlin, the director of photography, doesn't just film the scenes. He carefully crafts every shot to amplify that creeping sense of dread that's the heartbeat of this movie. It's as if the camera has a secret pact with death itself, always lurking just out of sight, but never letting you forget it's there. One of the first things that jumps out is McLaughlin's masterful use of perspective. The camera angles aren't chosen at random. They're strategically weird, skewed, or unsettling in subtle ways that mess with your sense of balance and space. Imagine looking at a scene and feeling that just a little something is off, not enough to outright freak you out on first glance, but enough that you instinctively glance around, wondering what's wrong. Low angles are used to make objects or environments feel ominous, towering over characters, while high angles can make characters look small, vulnerable, and trapped. This constant visual tension keeps you uneasy without you even realizing why. The framing often places everyday objects front and center in the shot. A hanging fan, a loose tile, a glass of water, and the camera lingers on them just long enough to make you nervous. You know these mundane details are about to become instruments of fate, but when and how? That anticipation is part of the cinematic thrill. Lighting is another superstar in the film's visual playbook. The color palette is deliberately cool and muted, with blues, grays, and washed-out tones dominating most scenes. This choice strips warmth and comfort away from the world on screen, making everything feel sterile and emotionally distant, like you're watching life slowly drain away. Even during the daylight scenes, there's this eerie, subdued quality to the light, as if the sun itself is dimmed. When darkness falls, the cinematography leans heavily into deep shadows and stark contrasts. Flickering fluorescent lights hum ominously, casting jittery shadows that seem to move and breathe. The way the light catches on different surfaces, like metal pipes or glass shards, turns the environment into a sinister playground. These lighting choices don't just set the mood. They actively participate in storytelling, highlighting danger spots and shaping your emotional response. The movement of the camera is equally important in creating tension. Instead of frantic cutting or shaky handheld shots that scream "scary movie," McLachlan opts for slow, deliberate tracking and panning shots that follow characters through spaces with an almost predatory patience. It's like the camera is stalking alongside fate itself, quietly observing the characters as they move toward their inevitable doom. When the camera pauses or focuses on a tiny detail, a dripping faucet, a frayed wire, it stretches the moment, ratcheting up your anxiety as you wait for disaster to strike. This slow burn style makes the eventual shocks hit harder because you've been left to stew in a stew of quiet dread. There are some standout visual sequences that really showcase the cinematography's power. The opening airplane scene is a perfect example. The camera moves through the confined cabin space, capturing passengers' faces filled with casual conversation and nervous anticipation. As the disaster unfolds, the camera doesn't rush away or jump around chaotically. Instead, it weaves carefully through the chaos, giving you a visceral, almost claustrophobic sense of being trapped with them. The explosion itself is shot in a way that feels sudden but also eerily realistic. Fragments of debris flying, faces flashing in panic, making it one of the most memorable and effective disaster sequences in horror cinema. Then there's the bathroom sequence with Todd, a masterclass in how framing and lighting can transform a normal setting into a claustrophobic nightmare. The tight shots, flickering lights, and creeping shadows turn the bathroom into a character in its own right. Hostile, unpredictable, and terrifying. The cinematography puts you right there with Todd, sharing his growing panic and sense of entrapment. You can almost feel the cold tiles, hear the dripping water, and sense the menace lurking just beyond the frame. The way McLachlan plays with symmetry and imbalance in the framing echoes the film's themes of order versus chaos. Shots often start perfectly composed. Neat lines, balanced objects, calm spaces. But then something breaks the symmetry, like a loose cable dangling or a cup teetering on the edge of a table. This visual metaphor for the fragile balance of life and death keeps the audience on edge, constantly expecting the normal to tip into disaster. Color is used sparingly but effectively. The muted tones reinforce the lifeless, bleak atmosphere, while splashes of red, blood stains, warning signs, or even small objects pop out to jolt your attention. These moments feel like visual alarms, warning you that trouble is coming. This controlled use of color complements the lighting and framing to guide your emotional journey through the film without needing heavy-handed cues. Sound and cinematography often work hand in hand. The visuals often focus on objects that produce ominous sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the drip of water, the buzz of electricity, and the camera highlights these just before disaster strikes. This interplay pulls you deeper into the suspense because you're seeing and hearing the warning signs simultaneously, building a multi-sensory sense of dread. Editing choices also support the cinematography by allowing shots to breathe, not rushing through scenes but giving moments to simmer. When combined with the camera's careful focus on detail and movement, this makes every second feel charged with possibility. You become hyper-aware of every movement, every glance, every sound, waiting for the next piece of the deadly puzzle to fall into place. In Final Destination, the cinematography does more than just capture the action. It weaves an atmosphere so palpable that you almost feel like you're living inside the film's world, sharing the characters' paranoia and fear. It turns everyday locations, classrooms, bathrooms, highways, into battlegrounds where fate plays a cruel game. Every shot is a calculated move in that game, designed to keep you guessing, tense, and thoroughly hooked. It's a visual experience that makes you look twice at everything around you because once you've seen the film, you'll never view the mundane the same way again. That's the power of cinematography done right. It doesn't just show you the story, it makes you feel it, deep down in your bones. Alright, buckle up because the editing and pacing in Final Destination are like a high-stakes tightrope walk that keeps you on the edge of your seat the whole time. The editors don't just chop scenes together. They orchestrate a rhythm that mirrors the relentless march of fate itself. This movie isn't a frantic roller coaster that zips by with non-stop action. It's a carefully timed ticking clock, where the flow ebbs and swells, pulling you in deeper with every cut. From the very start, the editing grabs your attention by balancing tension and release. The opening airplane disaster is a whirlwind of carefully timed cuts, quick enough to disorient you but controlled enough so you never lose track of what's happening. You feel the chaos and panic, but the flow is clear and intentional. The way shots flick from the terrified faces to exploding engines to falling debris creates a sense of controlled mayhem that sets the tone for the entire film. It's a pulse-racing sequence that's both frantic and precise. Once the immediate crisis is over, the pacing slows down deliberately. The editing lets scenes breathe, giving characters moments to react, plan, and argue. This slower rhythm isn't just to build drama. It's the calm before the storm, letting you feel the creeping dread settle in like a shadow. The cuts become longer, and the transitions smooth, almost seamless, which lulls you into a false sense of security. The tension builds quietly beneath the surface during these scenes. Each conversation, each glance carries weight because you know disaster is lurking, even if the characters don't. What's really clever about the editing is how it handles the movie's hallmark, death set pieces. These aren't just quick shock moments but elaborately choreographed sequences where timing is everything. The cuts in these scenes slow and speed up perfectly to match the escalating danger. Sometimes the editing holds on a single shot longer than you expect, making you squirm in your seat as you watch a precariously placed object inch toward disaster. Then, just when you think you can breathe again, the editing snaps to a sudden sharp cut, bam! And something goes horribly wrong. This push-and-pull pacing keeps you on edge, constantly guessing when the next catastrophe will strike. The transitions between scenes are mostly smooth, gliding you from one moment to the next without awkward jolts or confusing shifts. This helps maintain the narrative flow, making the story feel cohesive even as it jumps between different characters and settings. The editing respects the story's rhythm, pacing out reveals and scares so they land with maximum impact rather than overwhelming or tiring the audience. The editors also do a great job with parallel editing, cutting back and forth between different characters and scenarios to show how fate's web is tightening from multiple angles. This technique amps up the suspense because you're watching several threads unravel simultaneously, knowing that something disastrous is looming somewhere, even if you don't know exactly where or when. It's like watching a slow-motion domino effect play out in multiple places at once, and the editing keeps all these threads balanced so you never lose track. There are moments where the pacing quickens, not because the action itself is non-stop, but because the tension demands it. When characters start running out of time or when multiple dangers converge, the editing ramps up, shortening cuts and increasing the tempo. This creates a sense of urgency and chaos that feels perfectly natural and earned, rather than forced. It's as if the film's heartbeat quickens alongside the character's panic, pulling you into the moment even more. On the flip side, the film never feels like it drags. Even during quieter scenes, the editing keeps a subtle momentum going. There's a nice balance between moments of rest and bursts of tension, which means you never get bored or feel the story losing steam. Every cut, every scene length feels intentional, contributing to the overall rhythm and emotional pacing. What's especially impressive is how the editing supports the movie's underlying theme of inevitability. The steady buildup of tension, followed by sudden jolts of terror, mirrors the unstoppable approach of fate. The way the film cuts back and forth, lingering and rushing in just the right spots, makes you feel the relentless march of death closing in. There's no escape, just moments to brace yourself. Overall, the editing and pacing work together like a finely tuned clock, counting down to disaster with style and precision. You're never rushed, but you're never left waiting either. Instead, you're pulled into a hypnotic rhythm that makes every scene crackle with suspense, every moment feel loaded with meaning, and every cut count toward the story's chilling impact. It's an editing job that knows exactly how to keep you hooked, balanced between tension and release, unpredictability and inevitability, speed and patience, all while making the whole ride feel thrilling and utterly unforgettable. Let's talk about the soundtrack and score of Final Destination, the unsung heroes working behind the scenes to mess with your nerves and amplify every heartbeat of suspense. The music in this film isn't just background noise. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle that helps build the eerie, edge-of-your-seat atmosphere that keeps you hooked. It's like an invisible character, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to sneak up on you when you least expect it. One of the coolest things about the soundtrack is how it uses silence as much as sound. There are plenty of moments where the music drops away entirely, leaving only the ambient noises, the creak of a floorboard, a dripping faucet, the rush of a car passing by. This silence isn't empty. It's thick with tension, almost daring you to breathe a little too loudly and give away your position. When the score re-enters, it's often with subtle, unsettling tones, low drones, faint strings, or eerie synths that seem to vibrate under your skin. This contrast between quiet and sound sharpens your senses, making every note hit harder and every silence more suspenseful. The actual compositions are clever and precise, never overwhelming the scenes but always adding to the emotional impact. The score has this haunting, almost minimalist quality, with recurring motifs that subtly remind you of the inescapable fate stalking the characters. These musical themes don't scream danger all the time. Instead, they whisper it, lurking in the background and building a steady undercurrent of unease. It's the kind of music that worms into your head, sticking around long after the movie ends. There's also a smart use of dynamic shifts in the music to match the film's pacing. During calm moments, the score is sparse and restrained, almost like a quiet breath. But when chaos erupts, like in those trademark death scenes, the music surges dramatically, with sharp crescendos and dissonant bursts that jolt you out of your seat. These spikes in the score perfectly mirror the suddenness and unpredictability of the disasters, making the shock moments hit with more force. Beyond the original score, the soundtrack features some well-chosen songs that add flavor and personality to the film. These tracks often play during more casual scenes, like the high school hangouts or character interactions, giving the film a sense of place and time. They're not just filler music. They add layers to the storytelling by grounding the characters in a world that feels real and relatable, which makes the horror elements even more jarring when they hit. Another great aspect is how the score and sound design intertwine seamlessly. It's not always easy to separate where the music ends and the sound effects begin because they blend together to create a full sensory experience. The creaks, crashes, and ambient noises become part of the musical tapestry, heightening the tension and making every scene pulse with life, or with the threat of death. This fusion of sound and score keeps you immersed, making the movie's world feel all the more intense and immediate. What's really impressive is how the music never tries to do too much. It knows when to step back and let the visuals and performances take center stage, and when to step up and push the emotions higher. This restraint shows confidence in the storytelling and a clear understanding that the music's job is to support, not overshadow. It's a perfect balance that keeps the viewer fully engaged without feeling manipulated. In Final Destination, the soundtrack and score act like fate's own soundtrack, a constant, subtle reminder that danger is always lurking just out of sight. Whether through haunting melodies, chilling silence, or sudden bursts of sound, the music wraps around the film's suspense like a cloak, pulling you deeper into the story and keeping your heart pounding until the very last note. It's a masterclass in how to use music not just as decoration, but as a powerful storytelling tool that makes the horror feel that much more real and unavoidable. Alright, diving into the deeper waters of Final Destination, you quickly realize this isn't just a popcorn scarefest. It's also a surprisingly clever meditation on fate, control, and the little moments we usually overlook in our daily lives. The movie takes the simple, terrifying idea that death is inevitable and runs with it, but it does so in a way that gets you thinking without feeling preachy or heavy-handed. At its core, Final Destination is obsessed with the idea of fate as an unstoppable force, like this invisible puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes of our everyday existence. The characters try to cheat death by skipping their doomed flight, but the film keeps hammering home that you can't outrun destiny. It will come for you, no matter how many steps you take to avoid it. This theme plays out not just in the big disaster moments but in the tiny, seemingly insignificant details. A spilled cup, a loose wire, a falling beam. The movie is basically saying that life is a fragile web of chance, and one wrong move can send the whole thing crashing down. It's a creepy reminder to pay attention because the world around you is packed with hidden dangers that could be waiting to trip you up at any second. What's really interesting is how the film explores the illusion of control. The characters spend a lot of time trying to outsmart death, figuring out patterns and creating plans to survive. But no matter how clever or desperate they get, the story constantly reminds us that control is just a comforting myth. You might slow down the inevitable, but you can't stop it. This taps into a universal anxiety. Who hasn't felt powerless at some point, staring down something they can't change? The film doesn't give easy answers, but it invites you to sit with that discomfort, making the tension not just about physical danger but about existential dread. Another theme sneaking in under the surface is the randomness of life and death. The way the deaths unfold, so oddly specific, so bizarre, and so tied to everyday objects, pushes you to think about how unpredictable the world really is. Sometimes survival feels like pure luck, a cosmic coin toss with no rhyme or reason. This randomness adds to the film's tension because it takes away any hope of a pattern or logic you can exploit, making the story feel that much more chaotic and unsettling. The movie also plays with the idea of paranoia and obsession. Once the survivors start piecing together how death is targeting them, their fear becomes all-consuming. This paranoia drives their actions and decisions, sometimes pushing them to the edge of sanity. The film cleverly shows how fear of the unknown can twist people's minds, making them hyper-aware of every small detail, second-guessing every choice. It's almost like a psychological study of what happens when you're trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from. This theme gives the film emotional weight beyond just scares, letting us connect with the characters' very human reactions to impossible circumstances. There's also an underlying message about the value of life. How every moment counts, even the mundane ones we usually take for granted. By focusing on the tiny details that lead to disaster, the film kind of dares you to look closer at your own life, to appreciate how fragile and precious it is. It's not preachy, but it sneaks in this reflection through the tension and horror, leaving you thinking about how quickly things can change. The film touches on the tension between skepticism and belief as well. Some characters desperately want to find logical explanations or deny what's happening, while others accept the supernatural inevitability of death's design. This clash adds another layer of conflict and keeps the narrative dynamic. It's a subtle nod to the way we all handle fear and uncertainty differently. Some with denial, some with acceptance, and some with frantic action. All these themes and messages don't come across as forced or heavy-handed because Final Destination wraps them up in a thrilling, suspenseful package that never loses sight of entertainment. It uses horror and suspense to make you think, and thinking about fate, control, and randomness never felt so thrilling or terrifying. The film cleverly invites you to question how much of your life is truly in your hands and how much is just a roll of the dice. And just when you start feeling a bit too comfortable with your answers, it hits you with another twist, reminding you that in the world of Final Destination, nothing is ever quite what it seems. When it comes to Final Destination, the visual effects and CGI are like the secret sauce that makes all those wild death sequences believable enough to make you flinch, but not so flashy that they pull you right out of the story. The filmmakers strike a smart balance between practical effects and digital wizardry, blending them together to create scenes that feel both real and terrifyingly unpredictable. It's not about bombarding you with over-the-top explosions or flashy CGI spectacles. Instead, the effects work quietly and cleverly to support the story's suspense and keep you invested in what's happening. The practical effects are the unsung heroes here. You can tell a lot of effort went into making physical props and setups that actually behave like they would in real life. A falling beam, a swinging pipe, or a precarious stack of objects ready to come crashing down. These hands-on effects bring a tactile sense of reality to the film, which is crucial because the scares often come from everyday items turning deadly. When you see a real object teetering on the edge, it adds weight and authenticity that CGI alone can't always capture. The practical effects ground the film in a believable world where anything around you could turn into a lethal trap, and that feeling is pure nightmare fuel. But of course, the digital effects play a key role too. stepping in where practical effects just wouldn't cut it. The CGI is mostly used to enhance or extend those practical setups. Think speeding up falling debris, adding sparks, or showing objects moving in ways that would be impossible or too dangerous to film practically. The digital effects aren't flashy or distracting. They're subtle helpers that blend seamlessly with the physical elements. The goal isn't to dazzle you with CGI but to make the sequence flow smoothly and feel natural, which the film nails pretty well. There's a cool interplay between the two that makes each death sequence a little puzzle. Sometimes you'll spot where the practical effect starts and the CGI takes over, but more often than not, they meld together so well that you're too busy holding your breath to notice. This blending is important because it keeps the immersion intact. When the visuals feel real, the tension ramps up because your brain accepts the danger as plausible, making every near miss and fatal accident hit harder. One of the more impressive things about the effects is how creative they get with ordinary objects. The film takes stuff you see every day, kitchen utensils, tools, gym equipment, and turns them into bizarre weapons of fate. The effects team's job here is to make these scenarios believable and intense, and they do a fantastic job of showing these objects moving in slow motion, twisting, snapping, or colliding in ways that feel chillingly possible. You never get the sense of cheap or cheesy effects. Instead, each sequence feels carefully crafted to maximize suspense and surprise. The visual effects also support the film's pacing and rhythm. They're timed perfectly with the editing, music, and performances so that each death scene unfolds with a rising sense of dread and payoff. The tension builds as objects start to shift and move, and the effects bring that creeping danger to life with subtle details, like a rope fraying or a nail loosening, that keep you on edge without overwhelming your senses. Another thing to appreciate is how the effects respect the film's tone. Final Destination isn't aiming for superhero-level spectacle. It's more grounded and psychological. The visual effects mirror this approach by focusing on small, precise moments rather than flashy explosions. This restraint actually makes the scares feel fresher because they catch you off guard in everyday environments. The visuals aren't just there to shock you. They're there to tell a story about how fate uses the mundane to deliver its chilling verdict. Even years after its release, the effects hold up pretty well. Sure, some moments might look a bit dated by today's standards, but they don't detract from the film's impact. The practical foundation keeps the scenes feeling tangible, and the CGI enhancements mostly serve to polish and perfect rather than overpower. This mix helps Final Destination maintain its suspenseful edge and makes the visual effects a key part of why the movie's death scenes remain so memorable. All in all, the visual effects and CGI in Final Destination are a smart, subtle partnership that bring the film's unique brand of horror to life. They enhance immersion by making the danger feel real, amplify suspense with creative uses of everyday objects, and never steal the spotlight from the story or performances. It's a great example of how effects can be powerful storytelling tools when used thoughtfully and with a clear vision in mind. Final Destination doesn't just drop you into any old backdrop. It carefully crafts its world through smart set design and location choices that make the story's tension feel grounded and real. From the very beginning, the film plants you firmly in familiar places. High schools, highways, airplanes, and everyday hangouts. These settings aren't flashy or exotic, but that's exactly what makes them so effective. They feel like places you or I could be walking through, and that normalcy is what cranks the suspense dial way up. When the danger lurks in the mundane, the fear sneaks in under your skin in a way that glitzy, unrealistic sets just can't achieve. The production design leans heavily on the details. Small props, clutter, and well-thought-out environments that help sell the idea that disaster can strike anywhere, anytime. Take the high school scenes, for example. Lockers stuffed with textbooks, crowded hallways, a cafeteria buzzing with teenagers. These are settings packed with objects that later become potential weapons of fate. The way these spaces are populated feels lived in and natural, which makes it easier for the audience to connect and feel like this could be their world, making the impending doom hit that much harder. One of the coolest things about the locations is how they are chosen to amplify the tension. The film moves between wide-open spaces like highways and airports, places that feel big and impersonal, to cramped, enclosed spots like bathrooms and classrooms where the danger feels more immediate and inescapable. This variety keeps the story visually interesting while also serving the narrative. Open spaces suggest freedom but hide unexpected threats, while tight spaces trap the characters and push their panic to the edge. The set design is also clever in how it supports the film's signature death sequences. Everyday items are placed with purpose. Pipes dangling overhead, loose wires, glass bottles, even the placement of furniture, so that when disaster strikes, it feels almost inevitable, like the environment itself is a character working against the survivors. This careful staging adds a layer of suspense because you're constantly scanning the background, wondering which ordinary object will turn deadly next. What's impressive is that the locations don't overshadow the story or the characters. They provide just the right amount of atmosphere without becoming distractions. The muted color palettes, the slightly worn-down look of the sets, and the realistic textures help create a gritty, grounded tone that matches the film's mood perfectly. Nothing feels out of place or too polished, which keeps the tension authentic and raw. Even the airport scenes, which could have easily felt sterile or generic, are designed to feel hectic and chaotic, with crowds, announcements, and the constant hum of activity adding to the feeling that danger could strike at any moment. This environment contrasts with the eerie calm before the storm moments, heightening the suspense through the clash of noise and silence, movement and stillness. The film also uses its settings to subtly reflect the characters' emotional states. Crowded spaces often feel claustrophobic and overwhelming, mirroring the survivors' growing panic and helplessness. On the other hand, quieter, more isolated spots allow the tension to simmer, giving the audience a moment to catch their breath before the next jolt. This ebb and flow in the locations keeps the visual storytelling dynamic and engaging. In short, the set design and locations in Final Destination aren't just pretty backdrops, they're active players in the film's suspense game. They turn the ordinary into a playground of peril, making you realize that danger isn't lurking in dark alleys or haunted houses, but in the everyday world around you. This clever use of environment not only grounds the story in reality but also keeps you glued to the screen, scanning for the next unexpected twist hiding in plain sight. When it comes to the dialogue and script of Final Destination, the film nails that tricky balance between natural teen banter and the kind of sharp, punchy lines that stick with you long after the credits roll. The conversations never feel forced or overly dramatic. Instead, they capture that mix of casual chatter, nervous humor, and mounting tension that you'd expect from a group of young people caught in a nightmare they barely understand. The script gives the characters enough personality to feel real, making it easier to root for them, or at least be invested in what happens next. The dialogue often pops with moments of wit and sarcasm that cut through the fear, providing brief but welcome relief from the tension. These lines feel spontaneous, like something you'd actually overhear in a high school hallway, which helps keep the film grounded even as the plot veers into supernatural territory. Characters toss out jokes, snarky comments, and quick comebacks, showing that even in the face of death, they're still just teenagers trying to make sense of chaos with humor and bravado. It's this blend of sharp wit and relatable fear that keeps the script engaging and the characters human. At the same time, the script doesn't shy away from moments with real emotional weight. As the story unfolds and the death toll rises, the dialogue shifts from casual quips to heavier conversations about fate, mortality, and desperation. You get glimpses of genuine fear, regret, and confusion that add layers to the characters beyond just being victims of circumstance. These moments aren't overly sentimental but hit the right emotional notes to make you care about the people on screen and the impossible situation they're stuck in. Some standout lines in the film work as mini themes or warnings, encapsulating the movie's core ideas in just a few words. Phrases about cheating death, the inevitability of fate, or the slim chance of survival pop up at key moments, giving the dialogue a kind of rhythm and purpose beyond just moving the plot forward. These lines often echo in your mind as you watch the characters try to outwit their destiny, making the script feel like it's in constant conversation with the audience. The script also excels in building suspense through dialogue without giving too much away. Characters share clues, theories, and fears in a way that feels organic, pulling the audience deeper into the mystery without feeling like an info dump. This back and forth keeps the tension simmering and lets you play detective alongside the characters, piecing together the rules of death's design as the story unfolds. Interestingly, The film uses silence and pauses in dialogue just as effectively as spoken words. There are plenty of moments where what's left unsaid, or the nervous stares and reactions, communicate more than any line could. These quiet beats add to the film's atmosphere, letting the tension build naturally and making the dialogue-driven moments even more impactful. Even though it's a horror thriller, the script doesn't drown in clichés. It acknowledges familiar tropes but twists them just enough to keep you guessing and entertained. The dialogue reflects this by mixing genre-savvy lines with heartfelt, believable exchanges, making sure you're never too far from a moment of genuine connection amid the suspense. In essence, the dialogue and script of Final Destination work hand in hand to create a movie that's as much about people reacting to fear and fate as it is about the scares themselves. It's smart, sometimes funny, occasionally profound, and always paced to keep you hooked. Whether it's a quick quip that lightens the mood or a chilling line that underscores the film's fatalistic themes, the writing adds a crucial layer that makes the story more than just a series of death scenes. It makes it feel like a lived, breathing nightmare you can't look away from. Final Destination dives headfirst into the horror thriller genre but manages to shake things up in a way that keeps you guessing instead of just rolling your eyes at familiar tropes. At first glance, it looks like it's playing by the usual rules. A group of young people narrowly escape a deadly accident, only to be hunted down one by one. But beneath the surface, the film cleverly twists and turns those conventions to create something fresh and genuinely suspenseful. One of the biggest ways Final Destination bucks tradition is by making death itself the real antagonist. Not a monster, not a serial killer, but this unstoppable, invisible force that follows a strict, mysterious set of rules. This idea flips the typical kill or be killed horror formula on its head. Instead of a villain you can see or fight, the characters are battling fate, which feels way more unsettling because it's impersonal and inevitable. It's a smart twist that adds a layer of existential dread you don't usually get in teen horror flicks. The film also ditches the classic final girl trope to some extent. Instead of focusing on one ultimate survivor with supernatural resilience, the story plays with multiple characters trying to cheat death, each with their own quirks, fears, and flaws. This ensemble approach makes the suspense feel broader and less predictable because you don't know who might make it to the end or how their demise might unfold. It keeps you glued to the screen, trying to guess who's next and how the next death will be pulled off. Humor sneaks in just enough to break the tension without undercutting the stakes. The characters' witty remarks and sarcastic quips act as little pressure valves, reminding you that even in the face of death, people cling to humor as a coping mechanism. This balance of humor and horror makes the film feel more relatable and grounded, keeping it from becoming a non-stop gore fest or overly grim. When it comes to suspense, the movie masters the art of anticipation. Instead of constant jump scares, it builds dread through slow reveals, the careful setup of seemingly random objects, and those signature death sequences that feel like elaborate Rube Goldberg machines designed by fate itself. This methodical pacing gives the audience time to piece things together and heightens the tension because you're never quite sure how a death will happen, just that it will. It's a clever blend of thriller and horror that keeps the adrenaline pumping without exhausting your nerves. The film isn't shy about using some genre clichés, like the doomed teen group or the skeptic who refuses to believe in the supernatural, but it uses them as building blocks rather than crutches. These familiar elements provide a comfortable framework that the story then complicates and subverts. For example, the skeptic's denial isn't just a trope. It's a source of real conflict that drives the plot and character development, making the clichés feel earned and meaningful. In terms of action, Final Destination isn't about epic battles or chase sequences, but instead focuses on the quiet terror of everyday moments turning deadly. This makes the suspense feel more intimate and personal because the danger is always lurking just around the corner, in a loose wire, a spilled drink, or a falling object. It's a fresh take on action within the horror genre, emphasizing tension over spectacle. The drama is threaded through the film via the characters' relationships and their growing panic. You get a sense of how fear can unravel friendships and turn people against each other, adding emotional weight to the unfolding chaos. This dramatic layer grounds the supernatural elements in human experience, making the stakes feel real beyond just the physical danger. All in all, Final Destination walks the tightrope between honoring genre expectations and flipping them on their head with clever ideas and strong execution. It delivers suspense, scares, and even a bit of dark humor, all while keeping you hooked with its unique take on fate and inevitability. It's not just another teen horror flick. It's a fresh spin on what horror can be when it thinks outside the box. Final Destination might seem at first glance like just a roller coaster of scares and suspense, but if you peel back the layers, you'll find some interesting social and cultural threads woven throughout the chaos. The film taps into a few deeper anxieties that were bubbling under the surface around the turn of the millennium and still resonate today. Things like the illusion of control in a chaotic world, the fragility of life, and our attempts to rationalize random tragedy. One of the big undercurrents is the idea of fate versus free will. This is a classic philosophical debate, but the film brings it into a very contemporary setting, especially for the early 2000s, when technology and science were booming and people were starting to feel more in control than ever. Yet, Final Destination pokes holes in that confidence by suggesting that no matter how much we plan or try to outsmart death, some things are just beyond our control. It's a humbling commentary on human hubris, a reminder that despite all our advancements, life can be unpredictably cruel. This theme sneaks into the story naturally, without hitting you over the head, letting you chew on it while you're busy watching nerve-wracking death sequences. The film also touches on how people respond to trauma and fear, especially in a culture obsessed with denial and control. The survivors' reactions, ranging from denial to frantic attempts to cheat fate, mirror real human behaviors when faced with crises. This makes the story not just a supernatural thriller but also a reflection on how we handle stress and uncertainty in life. It's interesting to see how some characters cling to logic and skepticism while others turn to superstition or panic, highlighting the diverse ways people cope with the unknown. This adds a psychological layer that makes the horror feel more personal and relatable. There's also an unspoken nod to the idea of survivor's guilt, and the emotional fallout that comes with escaping death while others don't. Though the film doesn't dive deeply into this with long monologues or heavy scenes, it's threaded through the character interactions and their growing paranoia. This subtle portrayal of survivors' guilt is a social commentary on how trauma survivors often wrestle with feelings of guilt and helplessness, a theme that resonates beyond the horror genre. On a cultural level, the film reflects early 2000s youth culture in a way that feels authentic but also a bit dated now, which is part of its charm. The characters' slang, fashion, and attitudes paint a picture of that era's teenage experience, complete with its mix of skepticism, bravado, and vulnerability. This snapshot serves as a time capsule, reminding us how pop culture and youth identity have evolved since then. Interestingly, Final Destination also comments on society's fascination with fate, chance, and the supernatural. It taps into the human urge to find patterns or explanations in random events, a theme that resonates in an age where conspiracy theories and superstitions still thrive despite our scientific progress. The film plays with this tension between belief and disbelief in a way that feels fresh and culturally relevant. In terms of politics or explicit social issues, the film doesn't take a direct stance, but its underlying themes about control, chaos, and mortality speak to broader human concerns that transcend specific political debates. It handles these complex ideas with a light touch, weaving them into the narrative so they enhance rather than overwhelm the story. So while Final Destination keeps you on the edge of your seat with its inventive death scenes and suspense, it also quietly invites you to think about bigger questions, about fate, survival, and how we make sense of life's randomness. It's like a horror movie and a philosophical puzzle wrapped into one, making it more than just your average thriller. Final Destination has a sneaky way of hooking you emotionally, even though it's packed with edge-of-your-seat thrills and grisly demise scenes. It's not just about jump scares or shocking deaths. It actually pulls you into the roller coaster of emotions the characters go through, making you feel their panic, disbelief, and desperation as if you were right there beside them. The film knows how to push buttons, sometimes making you jump out of your seat, sometimes catching your breath with a tense silence, and other times even sneaking in a moment of dark humor to lighten the mood before plunging back into chaos. From the very start, it grabs your attention with that iconic plane sequence. The tension is so thick, you almost feel like you're strapped in alongside the characters, counting down the seconds with them. That opening doesn't just shock you. It primes your emotions, setting a tone of unpredictability and danger that stays with you throughout the movie. You're constantly on edge, wondering who will be next, and the film uses this fear of the unknown to keep your adrenaline pumping. But it's not all just heart-pounding suspense. The film also taps into more subtle emotional moments, like the mix of disbelief and growing terror when the survivors start realizing death isn't done with them. You feel their confusion, the frantic attempts to outsmart fate, and the crushing weight of hopelessness creeping in. These moments create a surprisingly strong emotional connection because they show the human side of the horror. People struggling with something way beyond their control, facing their own mortality in real time. There are also flashes of relief through witty dialogue and interactions that remind you the characters are still, well, teenagers. Their banter, sarcastic remarks, and sometimes awkward emotional exchanges bring a level of authenticity and even warmth to the story. These moments make the characters more relatable and likable, so when danger strikes, you're genuinely worried, not just watching from a distance. What's really clever about Final Destination is how it invites you to play along with the story. The film practically dares you to predict how the next death will happen, turning the audience into active participants rather than passive viewers. This engagement makes repeat viewings a natural impulse because you want to catch all the clues and setups you might have missed the first time around. It's almost like a suspenseful puzzle, where every object and detail could be a ticking time bomb, waiting to go off. The movie also sparks discussion about fate, luck, and whether you can cheat death, which keeps conversations going long after you've watched it. People love debating the logic of the death sequences or which character's demise was the most creative or chilling. This ongoing engagement is part of what makes Final Destination stick in people's minds as more than just a one-time thrill ride. On the emotional roller coaster scale, the film doesn't dive deep into tears or heart-wrenching drama, but it expertly mixes tension with just enough human moments to make the stakes feel personal and real. It's a balance that keeps you hooked without overwhelming you, giving you room to breathe between scares while still maintaining that constant undercurrent of dread. In short, Final Destination connects with its audience by blending shock, suspense, humor, and humanity in a way that keeps you emotionally invested and entertained from start to finish. It's a wild ride that makes you jump, think, laugh, and gasp, often all in the same scene, ensuring you're not just watching the film, but living it alongside the characters. When you stack Final Destination up against other horror films of its era, it's like watching a clever puzzle piece snap perfectly into place, but with a twist that sets it apart from the usual slasher or supernatural flicks. Compared to classics like Scream or I Know What You Did Last Summer, which ride heavily on masked killers and revenge plots, Final Destination tosses out the human villain altogether and hands the reins over to fate itself. That's a fresh spin that turns the whole genre on its head. Instead of trying to outsmart a person, the characters are trapped in this relentless game of cat and mouse with death as the ultimate predator. And death doesn't get tired, distracted, or caught. If you look at other films in the death or survival niche, like The Ring or The Grudge, which deal with curses and supernatural forces, Final Destination feels almost clinical in its approach. It doesn't lean on ghosts or monsters but focuses on a more abstract, almost cosmic force. This gives it a unique flavor, less about haunting or revenge, more about inevitability and the randomness of catastrophe. It's almost like a horror thriller with a sci-fi twist, where the enemy is an invisible set of rules and patterns, not a creature lurking in the shadows. Within its own franchise, Final Destination sets a high bar with its inventive death scenes and suspenseful pacing. The sequels sometimes push the creativity further, turning the Rube Goldberg-style deaths into a signature spectacle, but the original's charm lies in its simplicity and tight storytelling. It's like the blueprint that the rest try to build on, mixing suspense with a psychological twist in a way that feels fresh rather than just recycling ideas. Comparing it to the director James Wong's other works like The One or Space Cowboys, Final Destination definitely shows his flair for blending suspense with a strong narrative drive. Wong brings a precision to the storytelling that keeps the tension taut, and you can see his skill in balancing scares with character moments. Unlike some directors who focus purely on shock value, Wong crafts a film that's both intellectually engaging and thrilling, a mix that's not easy to pull off. In terms of pacing and tone, Final Destination manages to balance horror with dark humor better than many of its contemporaries. While movies like Halloween or Friday the 13th stick to a more relentless, grim tone, Final Destination sneaks in sarcastic quips and moments of levity that break up the tension just enough to keep the audience engaged without losing the scary edge. This tonal balance gives it a unique personality that's both scary and fun to watch. Also, unlike many horror films that rely heavily on jump scares, Final Destination builds its tension through anticipation and the slow unraveling of fate's plan. This narrative style feels more sophisticated and keeps the audience guessing, something you don't always get in the genre, which can sometimes fall back on cheap shocks. When you pit it against other death game or survival films like Saw or Cube, Final Destination stands apart because it doesn't rely on puzzles or traps set by a villain. Instead, the terror comes from the idea that death itself is a force you can't negotiate with or defeat. This philosophical edge adds a layer of depth that's often missing in pure gorefests, making the film linger in your mind longer. Overall, Final Destination offers a unique cocktail of suspense, inventive storytelling, and psychological horror that carves out its own space in the genre. It's not just another horror movie. It's a fresh take that influences how we think about fate, death, and survival in cinema, setting itself apart from both its predecessors and the waves of copycats that followed. Final Destination isn't just about clever death scenes and non-stop suspense. It's also packed with symbolism and metaphors that sneak in beneath the surface, adding layers of meaning if you pay close attention. One of the biggest recurring motifs throughout the film is the idea of inevitability, and the visuals do a fantastic job of hammering that home without spelling it out. From the opening plane disaster to the tiny details like a spilled drink or a loose wire, the film uses everyday objects and ordinary moments as symbols of how fragile life really is, and how death can lurk in the most mundane places. Take the concept of the chain reaction. This isn't just a plot device for building tension, it's a metaphor for cause and effect, the domino effect of choices and chance. Every small event triggers another, like a perfectly timed cascade leading to disaster. It's a neat way of showing that life is interconnected, and that even tiny actions have consequences you might never predict. It's a subtle nudge to the audience to be aware of the details around them, to see the world as a delicate balance where everything is connected, whether we realize it or not. Then there's the recurring visual cue of the clock or the ticking time bomb feeling that permeates the film. Time is constantly pressing down on the characters, and the film's framing often highlights clocks or countdowns, reinforcing the idea that time is running out for the survivors. This is more than just a suspense tool. It's a symbol of mortality itself, the unstoppable march toward death that none of us can escape. The way the film zooms in on these time-related details creates a mood of urgency and anxiety that's both literal and metaphorical. Death itself is portrayed almost like a silent, invisible force, an unseen puppeteer pulling strings behind the scenes. The absence of a villain or monster is a clever metaphor for life's unpredictability and randomness. Instead of a physical antagonist, death is like a shadow lurking just out of sight, always present but never fully revealed. This makes it feel universal, a concept rather than a character, which amps up the existential dread because it's not something you can fight or understand fully. The survivors themselves can be seen as metaphors for human resistance and denial in the face of fate. Their desperate attempts to cheat death symbolize our own struggles with accepting mortality and the unknown. Every time they try to outsmart fate, it's like a reflection of our own denial mechanisms, how we tell ourselves it won't happen to me, even when evidence says otherwise. This adds a psychological depth that makes the film more than just a series of deaths. It becomes a meditation on how humans cope with fear and uncertainty. There's also a clever use of visual foreshadowing, those moments when the camera lingers on a seemingly innocent object or action that later becomes a key part of a death sequence. This isn't just for suspense. It's a way of showing that fate has already written the script, and the audience is given a peek behind the curtain. These subtle cues turn the film into a kind of puzzle or game, inviting viewers to spot the signs and anticipate what's coming next. Even the design of the death scenes themselves carries symbolic weight. The chaotic, almost mechanical nature of how these deaths unfold mirrors the relentless, impartial force of death in real life. Random, unstoppable, and indifferent to human emotions. The elaborate setups feel like cruel but precise machinery, which contrasts sharply with the characters' frantic and emotional reactions, highlighting the cold inevitability of fate versus human vulnerability. So, beneath the surface thrills, Final Destination uses symbolism and metaphors to deepen its themes about mortality, control, and the fragility of life. These elements quietly enrich the storytelling, making the film not just a scary ride but a thought-provoking exploration of life's precariousness. Hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to look a little closer. Final Destination launched what would become a surprisingly enduring franchise, and when you look back, it's pretty fascinating how this seemingly simple concept, cheating death and then desperately trying to survive, grew into a whole cinematic universe. The original 2000 film is like the seed that planted the whole idea of an invisible, unstoppable force hunting down survivors in creative, twisted ways. It's the blueprint, the origin story that set the tone and rules for everything that followed. What's cool about the franchise is how it builds on that core idea without relying on a traditional villain or antagonist. Instead, the story revolves around the idea that death itself is an invisible character, a cosmic force that can't be bargained with or beaten. The original film introduces us to this concept with a grounded, suspense-driven approach, focusing on a small group of people and their panic-stricken attempts to outwit fate. This makes the first movie feel intimate and personal, almost like a psychological thriller dressed up in horror clothes. As the franchise expanded, it got bigger and bolder with its death sequences, turning them into set-piece spectacles. But the 2000 film remains special because it lays the foundation. It's the one that feels the most raw and tense, before the franchise leaned more into elaborate scenarios and darker humor. The original simplicity and focus on suspense and character reactions make it a standout, especially compared to its sequels, which sometimes prioritized style over substance. The movie also set the rules for the whole series. The idea that death has a plan, survivors are marked by a premonition, and every death follows a chain reaction of cause and effect. These elements create a consistent mythology that the later films explore and complicate, making each sequel feel like a new chapter in the same deadly game. So, the 2000 film is the cornerstone, the narrative heart that everything else revolves around. Looking at its place in the wider horror genre at the time, Final Destination arrived when the late 90s and early 2000s were flooded with teen slashers and supernatural thrillers. What made it stand out historically was its fresh approach. No killer with a mask, no haunted house, just the abstract and terrifying concept of fate. It tapped into a new kind of fear, more psychological and existential, which resonated with audiences craving something different. The movie's timing was also interesting because it came right before the big wave of torture porn horror films like Saw and Hostel. Instead of explicit gore for shock's sake, Final Destination relied on suspense, clever setups, and the anticipation of death to create horror. In that sense, it feels like a bridge between classic suspense-driven horror and the more graphic, visceral style that would dominate later in the decade. So, when you consider Final Destination in historical context and as part of a franchise, it's a pivotal piece. It sparked a whole subgenre focused on inventive deaths and fate's inevitability, influencing countless films and inspiring sequels, novels, and even video games. It's the origin story not just for its series, but for a distinctive approach to horror that blends suspense, creativity, and a touch of philosophical dread. Final Destination came onto the scene with a surprisingly modest budget, around $23 million, which for a Hollywood thriller with those ambitious death set pieces was pretty lean. But here's where the magic happens. The filmmakers squeezed out production quality that felt much bigger and more polished than what the numbers might suggest. The movie didn't rely on massive explosions or expensive CGI extravaganzas. Instead, it focused on clever practical effects, smart camera work, and creative setups that made each death sequence memorable and believable without breaking the bank. It's a great example of how creativity and smart planning can stretch a budget far beyond what you'd expect. When the movie hit theaters in 2000, it wasn't exactly hyped up like a blockbuster event, but it quickly built a strong buzz among horror fans and casual viewers alike. Word of mouth helped it gain traction, especially because it was different from the usual slashers dominating the market. The marketing leaned into the suspenseful premise, teasing the idea of cheating death, and that mystery hook pulled audiences in. The trailers and posters were effective without overselling the film, which helped set audience expectations just right. Financially, Final Destination was a solid success. It grossed over $100 million worldwide, which means it more than quadrupled its production budget. For a horror film, especially one that wasn't a sequel or part of an existing franchise, this was impressive and proved there was a real appetite for fresh, high-concept horror. This success also made studios take notice and greenlight the sequels that followed, knowing this formula had staying power. Interestingly, the film's success wasn't just about the box office. It became a cultural touchstone that lived on through home video, TV broadcasts, and later streaming platforms. Its financial performance gave it longevity beyond theaters, cementing its place in horror history and keeping the franchise alive for years. The marketing team deserves some credit for striking a balance between mystery and excitement. Instead of revealing too much, they played up the suspense and the fear of the unseen, which intrigued viewers and created anticipation. The tagline and promotional materials highlighted the inevitability of death without spoiling the inventive ways it would happen, making audiences curious to see the movie for themselves. All in all, the budget-to-quality ratio of Final Destination was one of those sweet spots in filmmaking, where limited resources didn't limit the impact. It managed to deliver a polished, engaging experience that was both financially rewarding and creatively satisfying. The smart use of funds, combined with clever marketing and positive audience reception, made it a standout success story in the early 2000s horror landscape. If you're ready to dive into the world of Final Destination and experience that heart-pounding edge-of-your-seat suspense firsthand, there are a few ways to catch this classic thriller depending on what suits your viewing style. For the fullest impact, watching it in a dark, quiet room where every creak and whisper can make you jump is ideal, because this film thrives on atmosphere and tension, and nothing beats catching those subtle details and sudden scares in a focused setting. If you're all about convenience and streaming, Final Destination is often available on popular platforms like Netflix, Hulu, or Amazon Prime Video depending on your region and current licensing deals. Streaming lets you instantly jump into the action without any hassle, which is perfect for those spontaneous movie nights. The downside: the quality can sometimes vary depending on your internet connection, so make sure you have a good setup with headphones or a solid sound system to really feel the eerie soundtrack and sudden silences that build the suspense. For those who want the crispest picture and sound, renting or purchasing the movie digitally on platforms like iTunes, Google Play, or YouTube Movies is a great option. This way you get HD quality and the ability to watch offline, which means no interruptions or buffering during those crucial tense moments. Plus, digital copies often come with extras like behind-the-scenes footage or director's commentary, adding an extra layer of fun if you're a superfan who loves digging into the filmmaking process. If you're a purist or collector, hunting down a physical copy, like a DVD or Blu-ray, can be rewarding. The Blu-ray versions especially shine with enhanced visuals and audio, making the clever death sequences and atmospheric cinematography pop even more. Plus, owning a physical copy means you can rewatch it any time, pause to analyze those foreshadowing moments, or even host a spooky movie night with friends who appreciate a classic horror flick. The theatrical experience is, of course, the original way to watch Final Destination, and while it's not currently in theaters, imagine catching it on a big screen with booming sound and a crowd reacting to every twist. That communal adrenaline rush is hard to beat. If any special screenings, horror marathons, or revival showings pop up at local theaters or film festivals, those can be golden opportunities to relive the film in that immersive setting. Whichever way you choose to watch, the key to getting the most out of Final Destination is to set the mood. Dim the lights, turn off distractions, and prepare for a ride where every little detail might be a clue, and every moment could be a deadly surprise. It's a movie that rewards close attention, so giving it your full focus will make the suspense and thrills hit that much harder.